In the first video that I made two rules for this series. The first one was that I wouldn't talk about my school, which I proceeded to break in the second video. The second rule was that I wouldn't talk about Egyptian politics. But that doesn't stop me from talking about Australian politics. And if you're not aware, in Australia this weekend there's going to be an election, and for the first time I've had to vote overseas. Now, when I was a young child, my mother always made it very clear that you didn't tell people who you voted for. So whenever my mum and dad would go away on election day and do their vote and come home, I'd ask them who they voted for, and she'd always respond something like Mickey Mouse. And so here was me thinking that we were leading into some great Disney utopian world, when in fact we just got the same old candidates that we always got. I found myself to be one of those elusive people who call themselves a swinging voter. I found myself voting for both parties at different times. And the reason is not because I can't make up my mind or I don't know what my ideology is. The reason is because on social issues I'm very much left-leaning. I want to know that people are looked after and people are cared for. But economically, I'm also very conservative. And so when I look to see who needs to be in power, I look and I ask myself, which way are we leaning? Do we need a bigger heart at the moment, or do we need to tighten the belt? It changes each time. Being overseas for a federal election and the build-up to a federal election has been interesting for me. Each morning I wake up and I read The Australian and I read the Canberra Times on my tablet. And it's become increasingly clear the amount of media bias there is for one party over the other party within the mainstream media. If you believe the mainstream media, one party is led by a backstabbing, backflipping egomaniac who can't be trusted, and the other leader is a nice guy. No, really he is. You just have to get to know him. Like he's got daughters. How could he be bad if he had daughters? And day after day, I would read these articles, and I couldn't believe that this rubbish, this biased rubbish was out there. You can look up the independent media, but what I've noticed with the independent media is because there's such a strong bias in the mainstream media, they feel they have to balance that bias with a complete swing in the opposite direction. So it's very hard to find good, clear information on policy, on what people are standing for, and what we're actually voting for, apart from personalities. So that leads me to the point of actually voting for the first time overseas. I had to make my way to the Egyptian embassy, which for voting purposes was only open between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. each day on working days. So I had to leave school and head downtown for the first time. Downtown Cairo in a taxi, it feels safe, but there are definitely the clear signs of the civil unrest that's been going on. There are tanks in the streets, mostly causing traffic jams, just sitting there with people on top. There are shells of a couple of buildings that have been blown up or burnt. But in general, the streets were quiet. The embassy itself wasn't what I was expecting. I grew up in Canberra. In Canberra, we are the home of embassies, and I think we do it very well, because what we ask each of the countries is to try and design the embassy in a way that reflects their country. So the Chinese embassy has beautiful traditional Chinese architecture. The American embassy is a Georgian plantation, which may or may not be the right signal that they wish to send out. But I was expecting something similar. Maybe when I turned up at the embassy, it would just be a giant Akubra hat. But alas, it wasn't. It was on the 11th floor of a building, and it was just about any office building that you could ever walk into with slightly higher security. So, Australian Embassy, I want to try a little bit harder next time. Let's see if we can create a building that looks like a shrimp on a barbie or a can of Foster's or something along those lines. Something we can be proud of. So I voted, and that process was nice and smooth. I was in and out of the embassy in about 15 minutes. and I'm happy to have done my civic duty. Now that leads to the one question: who did I vote for? And here is your answer.